Before Tiger, there was Ted Haggard, and some would say his scandal was as bad, if not worse, than Tiger's. Haggard was one of the top evangelical preachers.
Ted Haggard was once one of the most powerful evangelical leaders in America, leading a 14,000-member church and speaking regularly with the President of the United States. He built his empire preaching conservative values, moral discipline, and public faith. But behind the sermons was a hidden life that would destroy his reputation. Allegations of substances, secret encounters, and hypocrisy turned him from a respected pastor to a national scandal. His fall raised painful questions about faith, betrayal, forgiveness, and accountability. This is the story of Ted Haggard's rise, downfall, and controversial attempt to rebuild his legacy. The hidden scandal emerges. In the early 2000s, Ted Haggard stood as one of the most powerful evangelical leaders in America. As president of the National Association of Evangelicals, his voice reached millions. He led a massive Colorado Springs church with around 14,000 members, wrote best-selling books, advised political leaders, and reportedly spoke regularly with then-President George W. Bush. To many, Ted seemed like the ideal modern pastor, confident, warm, relatable, and firm in his beliefs. But behind that polished image, there was this secret thing that would end up taking out his reputation. In 2006, Mike Jones, a Denver-based male masseur and escort, said publicly that Ted had paid him for intimate encounters over 3 years or so. Mike also claimed Ted bought controlled substances from him and used them during their encounters too. The allegations were kind of explosive because they went straight against everything Ted had been preaching. He had publicly championed traditional marriage and condemned homosexuality and substance use. And then, suddenly, he was being accused of quietly living the very lifestyle he had criticized so hard from the pulpit. For the evangelical world, the shock was almost immediate. This was not only some private mess, it was a public contradiction, and it felt like a betrayal to many followers, so deep that they started to doubt the leader they thought they could trust. At first, Ted denied the accusations, and it sort of worked, at least for a moment. Some evangelical allies defended him as well, saying the claims were politically motivated, mainly because they came up during arguments about same-sex marriage. But then, as more and more details came out, that whole defense started to wobble. Reports, interviews, and evidence kept showing up in the spotlight, increasing the pressure on Ted's carefully guarded image, which was supposed to remain untouched. Eventually, Ted admitted to parts of the scandal, but kept denying the rest. He resigned from his leadership role at the National Association of Evangelicals, and he stepped away from New Life Church. Suddenly, his private life was out there for national media, public judgment, and even intense church scrutiny, all at once, almost unasked for. The fallout did not sit neatly with anyone. It split his community. Some members felt angry and betrayed, convinced Ted had misled them while preaching moral certainty. Others looked at the same mess through a different vocabulary: sin, forgiveness, and spiritual restoration. That split showed how complicated accountability can become inside religious communities, especially when faith, loyalty, and leadership are woven together tightly enough that pulling one thread affects everything else. Ted Haggard's scandal did more than knock down a powerful pastor. It highlighted the risk of hidden lives, the problem of authority without checks, and the way a public image can be built on private denial. It also forced a lot of people to ask what the pressures look like inside evangelical leadership and what the price can be for preaching certainty while quietly carrying unresolved struggles. Behind every public fall is a history that sets the stage for the drama. To understand Ted Haggard's rise and subsequent collapse, we must look back at the roots of his faith and ambition before the scandal came to light. Inside Ted Haggard's religious upbringing. Ted Arthur Haggard was born in Indiana into a deeply religious family. His father, J.M. Haggard, worked as a veterinarian while also founding a charismatic ministry, shaping the spiritual world Ted grew up in. From an early age, Ted was surrounded by teachings that emphasized the active power of the Holy Spirit, including prophecy, healing, speaking in tongues, and casting out demons. This environment became the foundation of Ted's faith. He saw charismatic Christianity not just as a belief, but as a living force that could transform lives. Even as a teenager, he was intensely committed to religion, though he also had other ambitions. In high school, he worked on the school newspaper and dreamed of becoming a journalist. At 16, Ted experienced a turning point after an encounter with evangelist Bill Bright, which inspired him to rededicate himself to Christ. But another major shift came through his father's influence. Ted was reportedly offered a new Pontiac Le Mans if he left secular college and enrolled at Oral Roberts University, a strict evangelical school known for rules against drinking, smoking, and premarital sexual activity. For Ted, this move marked the beginning of a path that would shape his future ministry, public image, and eventual rise in evangelical leadership. At first, Ted treated Oral Roberts University like it might be a journalistic jackpot. He honestly pictured himself uncovering scandals or exposing fake miracles. But pretty quickly, he was pulled into a whole atmosphere that valued prayer and spiritual authority more than regular academics. During his first semester, he said he experienced a visitation from the Holy Spirit, and he took it as a direct summons to become a pastor. That spiritual shift, plus meeting his future wife, Gail Alcorn, pretty much locked his direction away from journalism and toward ministry. His early years there also showed this complicated side of him. Even while he chased the new calling, he couldn't fully let go of doubts about Oral Roberts himself. In fact, he started to suspect the university's namesake had inappropriate relationships, which sounds bold, but it was part of what he kept privately worrying about. Those suspicions came from a mix of personal drive and a kind of youthful distrust. You know the kind where everything feels half-hidden. And then there was the love story, his courtship and marriage to Gail, and together they raised 5 children. After he graduated, Ted worked in several associate pastoral roles, slowly stacking up experience and influence. Then, in the early 1980s, a vision shared by a close friend stirred him into founding his own church in Colorado Springs. That turned into New Life Church, starting small, 20 members meeting in Ted's basement, kind of ordinary in appearance. These formative years laid the foundation for a man who combined spiritual zeal with organizational savvy. But as his ministry expanded, so too did the pressures and contradictions that would later define his downfall. Rise of New Life Church. New Life Church began as a small gathering, but thanks to Ted Haggard's dynamic leadership, it soon blossomed into a spiritual powerhouse. Ted motivated his growing congregation with messages of apostolic power and personal responsibility, urging members to see challenges as internal struggles rather than external enemies. This approach resonated deeply, fueling rapid expansion. From meeting in a basement, the church soon moved into strip malls and eventually a sprawling private campus nestled at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. By the early 2000s, New Life Church boasted more than 14,000 attendees, one of the largest evangelical congregations in the United States. Ted's approachable style, dismissive of traditional sermons in favor of speaking from a round platform surrounded by his audience, helped endear him to worshipers. His casual dress of blue jeans and use of a Palm Pilot rather than a Bible during services marked him as a modern, relatable pastor. He even rode a scooter to save gas, underscoring a persona that combined humility with influence. Politically, Ted was as outspoken as he was charismatic. Close ties to then-President George W. Bush and frequent conversations with the White House positioned him at the heart of evangelical political power. His opposition to same-sex marriage and support for conservative amendments like Colorado Amendment 43 amplified his status among social conservatives. His voice was not just heard in church, but echoed in state legislatures and national conversations. Ted's leadership style somewhat broke the usual church hierarchies. He put in place a servant leadership model where all staff were treated as equals, and they got paid equally too, kind of based on tenure, not position. It was this bold little plan meant to grow cooperation and keep the most talented employees. Underneath it all, Ted seemed convinced that a free market way of running church stuff could work, even in a religious setting. Overall, it was forward-thinking enough to make New Life feel different, and that definitely helped its appeal. During this same stretch, Ted's profile kept climbing, not just inside his congregation. In 2005, Time magazine picked him as one of America's 25 most influential evangelicals. He was pretty often invited to preach guest sermons across the country, and the fees he commanded were basically in the 5- and 6-figure range. People seemed to really respond to how he could mix devout traditionalism with a friendly, personable manner, so his fan base kept expanding. But beneath all that public glow, there were pretty rigid moral convictions. Ted's anti-homo teachings were already solidly formed well before his later public downfall. Even back in high school, he had published articles criticizing actions he believed didn't line up with his strict religious rules. Later on, his activism went even further, including urging followers to physically defend businesses he viewed as wrong or immoral. That kind of rhetoric made him look like a fervent fighter in a spiritual conflict against evil, at least as he framed it. As the church grew and Ted's reach went wider, the scene was basically set for a major rupture between what he said in public and what was going on privately. From these soaring heights, the story took a sudden, shocking turn, unraveling the man and ministry many thought invincible. Double life and exposure. Ted Haggard's public image began to collapse in late 2006 when Mike Jones, a Denver-based male masseur and escort, came forward with explosive allegations. Mike claimed he had a secret 3-year relationship with Ted involving paid intimate encounters and substance use. He also alleged that Ted bought controlled substance before some of their meetings. The accusations stunned the evangelical world because Ted had built his reputation as a powerful pastor who publicly condemned substance use and anything outside traditional Christian morality. At first, Ted denied the claims. He admitted buying substances from Mike, but insisted he threw them away and never used them. He also denied any intimate relationship. Some evangelical supporters defended him, suggesting the timing was political because Colorado was debating same-sex marriage issues. But that defense weakened as more details surfaced. Mike claimed Ted used the name Art to hide his identity and arranged meetings through discreet calls and late-night contact. Then voicemail recordings emerged, allegedly capturing Ted asking for substances. The recordings damaged his credibility and raised deeper questions about what else had been hidden. As pressure mounted, Gail Haggard's disbelief turned into painful acceptance. Ted eventually admitted to substance use and immorality, though he continued denying Mike's full version of events. The consequences came right away. Ted resigned as president of the National Association of Evangelicals, and he stepped away from New Life Church, that Colorado Springs megachurch he helped build into a major evangelical force. For a lot of followers, the drop was brutal. They trusted him not just as a pastor, but as a moral benchmark. And now, the distance between what he preached and what he did in private was just impossible to ignore, like it was suddenly right in front of them. After he resigned, church leaders put Ted into spiritual counseling for what they described as his struggles. A bunch of people believe that this involved conversion therapy, which is a practice that's controversial and heavily criticized, designed to change a person's orientation. Soon after, some church representatives said Ted was completely heterosexual, but many critics said that sounded unrealistic and also harmful, not some minor detail. Behind the scenes, Ted's exit came with strict conditions. He reportedly got a severance package of around $200,000, yet he also had to leave the ministry and relocate with his family. Even so, later on, some churches invited him to speak anyway. That made it obvious how split evangelical circles stayed, caught between accountability and forgiveness, and sometimes it felt like both at once. The scandal challenged not only Ted's legacy, but also sparked wider conversations about the personal costs of religious expectations and the pressures faced by leaders hiding their true selves. Fallout and attempts at redemption. After Ted Haggard's scandal exploded, his his life changed almost overnight. He lost his position, his influence, and the trust of many who once viewed him as one of America's most powerful evangelical leaders. His family was pulled into the fallout, facing public shame, constant media attention, and painful private conversations. Through it all, Gail Haggard stayed by his side, publicly affirming her commitment, even as she admitted the betrayal had deeply wounded her. Ted soon began trying to reshape the public narrative. In the HBO documentary, The Trials of Ted Haggard, viewers saw him struggling financially, selling insurance, and attempting to rebuild a life far removed from his mega-church days. Later interviews on Oprah, Larry King Live, and Good Morning America presented him as a humbled man seeking forgiveness. Ted framed his story around repentance, grace, and restoration, but not everyone accepted that version. Gail also became part of that redemption narrative. She spoke openly about choosing forgiveness and claimed their marriage had grown stronger after the scandal. To some, her loyalty reflected faith and resilience. To others, it seemed to overlook the damage caused by Ted's actions, especially to people who felt harmed by his past teachings and hypocrisy. Ted's statements about sexuality added more complexity. At one point, he claimed he had been cured of same-sex temptation through prayer. Later, however, he admitted that if he were younger, he might have identified as bisexual. These contradictions revealed a deeper struggle between faith, identity, shame, and the pressure to fit within conservative religious expectations. Meanwhile, New Life Church tried to move on by cutting formal ties with Ted. But then, additional claims came in pretty quickly, and honestly, it felt messy. A young man named Grant said that Ted behaved inappropriately while Ted was a pastor, and he also claimed people tried to silence him through money, plus legal pressure. Those allegations brought back old worries about secrecy, influence, and accountability inside the church. After all this, Ted later founded St. James Church in Colorado Springs, thinking it might be a clean slate. At first, lots of supporters showed up, and they believed in his message of grace. Yet, the earlier concerns returned too, when new reports alleged substance use and other inappropriate behavior. Some critics argued that Ted was still, in practice, guiding everything, like he was both the one accused and the judge. Gail later published Why I Stayed, and she framed her choice through faith and forgiveness, basically. Still, the book split readers in a way that mirrored Ted's own comeback. For some, their story reads like redemption. The chasm between who Ted presented himself to be and the reality he lived created a fracture that would reverberate far beyond church walls, setting the stage for the ongoing challenges that awaited him. The dark return and legacy. Ted Haggard's attempt to return to the evangelical world was never simple. After his 2-year media silence agreement ended, he stepped back into public life with interviews, public appearances, and a new church called St. James in Colorado Springs. He presented himself as a changed man, shaped by suffering and committed to grace. But the past never fully disappeared. Soon, new accusations surfaced. A young church volunteer named Grant accused Ted of inappropriate conduct during his earlier ministry and claimed there were efforts to keep him quiet with money. These allegations reopened old wounds and raised serious questions about accountability, especially when church leaders were accused of trying to suppress the story. Even at St. James, Ted sort of faced more controversy, you know. Reports claimed he got involved in questionable behavior again, including substance use, and also inappropriate interactions with young men. Instead of letting outside folks hold him accountable, Ted reportedly handled discipline himself, acting as both the accused and the judge, which really wrecked any sense of fairness. That damaged trust pretty fast, and some members left. Through all of it, Gail Haggard stayed publicly loyal. In her book, Why I Stayed, she told their struggles through faith, forgiveness, and commitment, as if that was the main lens. Some people admired her loyalty, while others felt her version of events overlooked the impact on other people, especially LGBTQ+ communities. Ted's own words, though, added another layer. In 2011, he said that if he were younger, he might identify as bisexual. That didn't line up with earlier claims that he had been cured through prayer. It makes the whole thing feel like a deeper fight between identity, faith, shame, and public expectation. By then, his life looked pretty different from his megachurch days. He sold insurance, he held prayer meetings in a barn, and he preached through a small YouTube platform. The 2022 sale of the St. James building, with questions about the money, only added more heat. So Ted Haggard's legacy stays complicated, a story of downfall, attempted redemption, repeated scandal, and still unanswered questions about faith, power, forgiveness, and accountability. Ted Haggard's life is a powerful reminder that behind public personas can lie complicated and painful truths. His rise, fall, and attempts at redemption reveal the difficult intersection of faith, power, and human imperfection. If you found this story compelling, please like this video and subscribe for more eye-opening documentaries on faith, scandals, and the human stories behind them. And before you go, the next video shown on your screen, where another shocking story of reputation, secrets, and consequences begins.